The leather chair creaked as my sister Victoria leaned toward me, in attorney Margaret Chen's conference room, her breath hot against my ear. "This is going to be embarrassing for you, Claire," she whispered loud enough for our three aunts to hear. "Grandma always said ungrateful granddaughters don't deserve inheritances. Hope you didn't take the day off work for nothing." Her laughter, sharp and deliberately cruel, echoed off the mahogany walls as I sat frozen, watching Margaret arrange documents on her desk with the careful precision of someone about to detonate a family bomb. What Victoria didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Grandma had called me 3 weeks before she died, her voice weak but determined. "Claire, sweetheart, need you to trust me. When they read the will, don't react to anything until Margaret finishes completely. Promise me." I'd promised. And now, watching Victoria's perfectly manicured nails tap against the conference table in smug anticipation, I was about to understand why. Drop a comment if you've ever been underestimated by family members who confuse absence with indifference. This story is about the moment when assumptions meet consequences. My name is Claire Donovan. I'm 36 years old, and I've spent the last decade being painted as the selfish granddaughter who abandoned family for career ambition, while my younger sister cultivated the image of a devoted caregiver. What they called abandonment, I knew, was survival. What they saw as devotion, Grandma apparently recognized as something else entirely. The Donovan family had always measured love in proximity. My grandmother, Margaret Rose Donovan, had lived in the same Philadelphia house for 63 years, raising 4 children who settled within a 10-mile radius, and expected their own children to do the same. Family dinners every Sunday, holiday celebrations that required 3 days of preparation, and an unspoken rule that moving away meant you didn't value family bonds. My mother, Sarah, 58, had built her entire identity around being the daughter who stayed close, who visited daily, who made sure Grandma never felt alone after Grandpa died. My aunts, Patricia, Linda, and Joan, had followed similar patterns, creating a tight family network where everyone knew everyone else's business, and proximity equaled devotion. My older cousins had absorbed these values completely. Michael, 39, lived 2 blocks from Grandma and stopped by every morning before work. Jennifer, 37, handled Grandma's grocery shopping and medical appointments. Daniel, 35, managed her lawn care and home repairs. They were the good grandchildren whose constant presence proved their love and secured their place in the family hierarchy. Then there was Victoria, 33, who had perfected the art of performative devotion. After college, Victoria had moved into Grandma's guest room temporarily to save money for her own place, a temporary arrangement that had lasted 5 years. She'd positioned herself as Grandma's primary companion, her closest confidant, the granddaughter who understood her best and sacrificed the most to ensure her comfort. "Victoria is such a blessing," became Grandma's standard phrase whenever relatives gathered. "She keeps me company, helps with the house, and makes sure I'm never lonely. I don't know what I'd do without her." The family had interpreted Victoria's living arrangement as selfless dedication rather than rent-free convenience. They saw daily presence as proof of superior love, never questioning whether quality of relationship mattered more than quantity of contact. And then there was me, the granddaughter who had moved to Seattle at 26 for a software engineering position that offered career opportunities Philadelphia couldn't match. The one who called weekly instead of visiting daily, who sent thoughtful gifts instead of providing physical presence, who built a successful life 2,800 miles away while being labeled the family disappointment. "Claire's gotten too busy for family," Mom would say during Sunday dinners. I attended via video call, her tone carrying disappointment that had calcified into permanent judgment. "Her career is more important than the people who raised her." The characterization hurt because it misrepresented both my choices and my relationship with Grandma. I hadn't moved away because family wasn't important. I'd moved because staying in Philadelphia meant accepting limitations that would have stunted my professional growth and personal development. My degree in computer science from Penn had positioned me for opportunities in tech hubs like Seattle, San Francisco, or Austin, cities where innovation happened and careers were built. Staying in Philadelphia would have meant working for companies that viewed technology as a support function rather than core business, earning $30,000 less annually, and limiting my professional network to regional connections. But explaining career strategy to family members who measured success by proximity felt futile, especially when Victoria was there every day, reinforcing their belief that physical presence equaled superior devotion. If you've ever been called selfish for choosing opportunities that required distance, hit that like button. You'll want to hear how this story unfolds. The dynamic had solidified during Grandma's final 5 years, after a minor stroke left her with mobility challenges that required more assistance with daily activities. Victoria had immediately positioned herself as primary caregiver, expanding her role from companion to indispensable support system. "I don't know how we'd manage without Victoria," Aunt Patricia had said during one of my visits home. "She's there every single day helping Mom with everything from medication management to meal preparation. The rest of us have our own families and responsibilities, but Victoria has made Grandma her priority." The implication was clear. Victoria's sacrifice deserved recognition and reward, while my absence despite a demanding career proved insufficient commitment to family obligations. But what the family didn't see, what they had no framework for understanding, was the relationship Grandma and I had built through weekly phone calls that lasted 2 hours, video chats where we discussed everything from politics to literature, to her memories of raising 4 children during the 1960s and my quarterly visits home where we had uninterrupted time together without family chaos. "Your sister is here every day," Grandma had told me during one visit, her voice carrying an edge I'd learned to recognize as frustration disguised as observation. "But we talk about her problems, her drama with boyfriends, her complaints about work. You call once a week and ask about my life, my thoughts, my memories. You listen, Claire. Really listen." I'd noted the distinction but hadn't fully understood its significance until much later. The family's perception of Victoria's devotion had reached peak intensity during Grandma's final year, when her health declined more rapidly, and she required increasing assistance with daily tasks. Victoria had become even more present, even more vocal about her sacrifices, even more celebrated by family members who viewed her dedication as the gold standard for grandchild devotion. "Victoria has put her entire life on hold to care for Mom," Aunt Linda had announced during Grandma's 87th birthday party. "She deserves everything Mom can give her for being such a devoted granddaughter. Everything Mom can give her." The statement had been a clear reference to inheritance expectations and Victoria's assumption that her daily presence would translate into financial reward when Grandma passed away. The expectations had been reinforced constantly during family gatherings where Victoria's sacrifices were catalogued and celebrated while my quarterly visits were treated as insufficient tokens from the granddaughter who had prioritized career over family. "Claire flew in for the weekend," Mom would announce with barely concealed disappointment, as if cross-country travel for a 2-day visit proved inadequate commitment compared to Victoria's daily presence. The comparisons were constant and increasingly pointed. Victoria helped with medication management. I sent articles about new treatments. Victoria drove Grandma to doctor appointments. I researched specialists and treatment options. Victoria was there for daily companionship. I provided intellectual stimulation through our long conversations about books, history, and current events. But in our family's hierarchy of values, physical presence outweighed every other form of connection or contribution. The breaking point in family perception had come 8 months before Grandma's death, during a health crisis that required hospitalization and revealed the true nature of Victoria's devotion. Grandma had fallen in her bathroom at 3 a.m., unable to reach her medical alert device. Victoria, sleeping in the guest room 20 feet away, hadn't heard anything. Grandma had lain on the cold tile floor for 6 hours before Victoria discovered her the next morning. I'd received a panicked call from Mom at 10 a.m. Seattle time. "Your grandmother is in the hospital. She fell during the night, and Victoria didn't find her until this morning. They're worried about hypothermia and potential fractures." I'd booked a flight immediately, arriving in Philadelphia 12 hours later. When I reached the hospital, I had found Victoria in the waiting room crying dramatically, while aunts comforted her and assured her the fall wasn't her fault. But when I'd entered Grandma's hospital room, her first words had been, "Victoria sleeps with headphones in, listening to podcasts all night. I've told her repeatedly that I might need help during the night, but she says she needs them to fall asleep." Her voice had been weak but clear, and her eyes had held something I'd never seen before. Disappointment in the granddaughter Rion celebrated as most devoted. The incident had resulted in family discussions about Grandma's care needs, and whether she should move to assisted living. Victoria had opposed the idea vehemently, insisting she could provide better care at home, though notably, she'd started wearing the headphones again within a week. I'd stayed in Philadelphia for 10 days, taking family medical leave from work to help establish better safety protocols and research care options. During that time, I'd had multiple conversations with Grandma about her living situation, her relationship with Victoria, and her growing frustration with the gap between Victoria's reputation and reality. Everyone thinks Victoria is so wonderful because she's here every day, Grandma had confided during one afternoon when Victoria was out shopping. But Claire, being present isn't the same as being present. She's here physically, but she's always on her phone, always distracted, always focused on her own drama. You call once a week and give me your complete attention for 2 hours. There, Camille. Distinction had struck me as significant, but I'd assumed it was just Grandma venting frustration, rather than forming judgments that would have lasting consequences. After returning to Seattle, I'd maintained our weekly calls while increasing my research into care options, medical specialists, and resources that could improve Grandma's quality of life. I'd sent books she'd mentioned wanting to read, arranged for meal delivery services that accommodated her dietary restrictions, and paid for a cleaning service to handle tasks that Victoria claimed to do, but often neglected. But every contribution I made from Seattle was invisible to family members who measured devotion in daily visits and physical presence, while Victoria's visibility ensured her reputation as the most devoted granddaughter remained unchallenged. The final months of Grandma's life had brought increased frailty and awareness that her time was limited. She'd asked me to visit in November, 4 months before she died, for what she'd described as important conversations we need to have while I still have clarity. I'd spent a week in Philadelphia, having daily conversations with Grandma about her life, her regrets, her observations about family dynamics, and her concerns about what would happen after she was gone. During one particularly memorable afternoon, she'd pulled out photo albums and walked me through decades of family history, sharing stories about each grandchild and her observations about their character development. Victoria has always needed constant validation, Grandma had said while looking at photos from Victoria's childhood. She's insecure despite the attention she receives, always seeking approval from whoever's watching. You've always been confident in your choices, Claire. You don't need everyone's approval to know you're doing the right thing. The assessment had felt both validating and bittersweet. Grandma understood me in ways the rest of the family never had, but that understanding would die with her. 3 weeks before Grandma passed, she'd called me at 11 p.m. Philadelphia time, 8 p.m. in Seattle, with unusual urgency in her voice. Claire, sweetheart, I need you to trust me about something. When they read my will after I'm gone, don't react to anything until the lawyer finishes completely. No matter what Victoria says, no matter how the family responds, just stay quiet until Margaret Chen reads everything. Promise me. Grandma, what's going on? Promise me first, Claire. This is important. I promise. Good. And remember, sometimes the people who perform devotion most publicly are the ones who understand it least. Real love doesn't require an audience. The conversation had puzzled me, but I'd kept my promise when the call came 6 weeks later. Grandma had died peacefully in her sleep, with Victoria asleep in the guest room, headphones in, unaware till morning that her meal ticket had expired. Comment promise below if you've ever kept faith with someone when everyone else doubted you. That trust is about to pay dividends. The funeral had been a theatrical production of grief, with it Victoria positioning herself as chief mourner whose loss was greater than anyone else's. She'd delivered a eulogy focused entirely on her sacrifices, the career opportunities she'd declined, the relationships she'd postponed, the life she'd put on hold to care for Grandma. I gave her everything, Victoria had sobbed from the podium. Every single day for 5 years, I was there. I was her companion, her caregiver, her closest friend. No one understood her like I did. The family had responded with tears and embraces, celebrating Victoria's devotion while barely acknowledging other grandchildren's relationships with Grandma. I'd remained silent, remembering Grandma's words about real love not requiring an audience. The will reading had been scheduled for 2 weeks after the funeral, allowing me time for grief processing while ensuring legal matters were addressed promptly. Attorney Margaret Chen had requested all primary beneficiaries attend in person, Grandma's 4 children and 8 grandchildren, plus several family friends who'd been mentioned in the will. Victoria had been confident, bordering on triumphant in the days leading up to the reading. Grandma told me repeatedly how grateful she was for everything I did, she'd announced during a family gathering. She said I deserved to be taken care of because I'd taken such good care of her. The implication was clear. Victoria expected to receive the bulk of Grandma's estate, the house, the majority of financial assets, and recognition as the granddaughter whose devotion had earned special reward. Now, sitting in Margaret Chen's conference room, I could feel Victoria's smugness radiating across the table as the attorney prepared to begin the formal reading. The room held 14 people, Grandma's 4 children in the front row, 8 grandchildren behind them, and 2 family friends seated near the windows. Margaret cleared her throat, her expression professionally neutral. Thank you all for being here. Margaret Rose Donovan's will was executed 18 months ago, and has been properly witnessed and notarized. I'll read the primary provisions first, then address specific bequests. She began with standard legal language about estate administration, then moved to the primary bequests. To my daughter Sarah Donovan I leave my collection of family photographs and albums, valued at approximately $5,000. $25,000 in cash. Mom nodded, accepting what was clearly a symbolic rather than substantial bequest. Margaret continued through similar provisions for each of Grandma's children. Personal items with sentimental value plus $25,000 cash. The amounts were generous but not life-changing, suggesting the bulk of the estate would be distributed among grandchildren. To my grandchildren Michael, Jennifer, and Daniel, I leave $15,000 each, with gratitude for their consistent presence and practical assistance during my final years. The cousins accepted the amounts with appreciation, enough to be meaningful, without suggesting favoritism. To my grandchildren Rachel, Thomas, and Matthew, I leave $10,000 each, with love and best wishes for their futures. The younger cousins smiled at receiving exactly what they'd expected from a grandmother who'd been generous but practical about financial distributions. Then Margaret paused, her eyes moving to Victoria before reading the next provision. To my granddaughter Victoria Donovan, I leave $5,000 and the guest bedroom furniture she's been using, with acknowledgement that she lived rent-free in my home for 5 years, and received considerable financial support during that time. The room went silent. $5,000. Less than cousins who visited monthly, a fraction of what cousins who helped with practical tasks received, and an amount clearly calculated to send a message about the perceived value of Victoria's contributions. Victoria's face flushed red. That's impossible, Grandma promised. Please let me finish, Margaret interrupted firmly. There are additional provisions. But Victoria wasn't listening. She turned to me with eyes full of malicious satisfaction, apparently believing the small bequest to her meant I'd receive nothing at all. This is going to be embarrassing for you, Claire, she hissed, loud enough for everyone to hear. Grandma always said ungrateful granddaughters don't deserve inheritances. Hope you didn't take the day off work for nothing. Her laughter filled the room, sharp and cruel, while family members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was the Victoria they never saw, the one who emerged when her expectations weren't met, the one whose devotion evaporated the moment it stopped being rewarded. Margaret waited for silence, then continued reading. To my granddaughter Claire Donovan, I leave $50,000 in cash, with pride in her accomplishments and gratitude for her genuine interest in my life and thoughts. $50,000. 10 times what Victoria received, more than any other grandchild, an amount that represented significant recognition but still felt proportionally small, given the family's assumptions about Grandma's total estate value. Victoria's laughter had stopped, but her face still held smug satisfaction. $50,000 was substantial, but not the life-changing inheritance she'd been expecting for either of us. Then Margaret did something unexpected. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope, its cream-colored paper thick and formal. There is one additional provision that Mrs. Donovan requested be read separately, after the primary bequests were announced. The room's energy shifted. Sealed provisions weren't standard procedure, they suggested something significant enough to require special handling. Margaret broke the seal carefully and unfolded 2 pages of heavy legal paper, covered in Grandma's handwriting, alongside Margaret's typed legal text. To be read aloud after all other provisions have been announced. Margaret began, her voice taking on a different tone, more personal, less procedural. I, Margaret Rose Donovan, being of sound mind and clear judgment, wish to explain certain decisions that may surprise my family. Victoria had gone very still, her earlier smugness replaced by something that looked like dawning dread. Margaret continued reading, and with each word I understood why Grandma had asked me to promise not to react until everything was finished. For 5 years, my granddaughter Victoria lived in my home, and my family celebrated her presence as proof of superior devotion. But proximity is not love, and performance is not care. Victoria was physically present but emotionally absent, more focused on her phone than our conversations, more interested in what my support could provide than who I was as a person. The room had gone completely silent. This wasn't just legal distribution. This was public accounting of character witnessed by the entire family. She slept with headphones every night, making herself unavailable in case I needed help. When I fell and lay on my bathroom floor for 6 hours, she was 20 feet away, unreachable because her podcast was more important than my safety. When family praised her devotion, she accepted the recognition without mentioning that I paid all her living expenses, bought her groceries, and gave her spending money while she saved her own income for herself. Mom's face had drained of color. The family had never heard this version of events. Victoria had carefully controlled the narrative to ensure her reputation remained untarnished. In contrast, my granddaughter Claire called every Sunday evening without fail, giving me 2 hours of her complete attention. She asked about my thoughts, my memories, my opinions on current events. She listened to my stories about raising children in the 1960s, about losing her grandfather, about my fears and hopes. She sent books I mentioned wanting to read, arranged services to make my life easier, researched medical treatments that might help my mobility. She visited quarterly and gave me her undivided attention rather than daily presence while distracted by her own concerns. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, but I kept mine fixed on Margaret, remembering Grandma's instruction not to re-STT until everything was finished. Real devotion doesn't require an audience. Real love doesn't need constant validation. Claire loved me without expecting recognition or reward. She built a successful career 2,800 miles away, and still maintained a relationship with me that was more genuine than daily proximity without emotional connection. Margaret paused to turn to the second page, where the legal language resumed. Therefore, in addition to the $50,000 previously mentioned, I leave to Claire Donovan the following: my house at 247 Maple Street, Philadelphia, valued at approximately $680,000. My investment portfolio held at Merrill Lynch, currently valued at approximately $1.20 million. My savings accounts totaling $340. My savings accounts totaling $340. 0. And all remaining personal property not specifically bequeathed to other individuals. The numbers landed like physical blows. Not thousands, millions. Not a bequest, an entire estate. The house where Victoria had lived rent-free for 5 years, the investments that had been carefully managed over decades, the savings that represented a lifetime of careful financial planning. Victoria made a strangled sound, her face cycling through emotions so rapidly I couldn't track them: shock, rage, humiliation, disbelief. But Margaret wasn't finished. I have one final request of Claire, that she not feel guilty about this inheritance or allow family pressure to make her question whether she deserves these assets. She does. Her genuine care, intellectual companionship, and emotional support. She understood that love is measured in quality of attention, not quantity of contact. She never performed devotion for an audience. She simply loved me as a person rather than as a grandmother who might reward her someday. Margaret folded the papers carefully and looked around the room. That concludes the reading of Margaret Rose Donovan's last will and testament. The estate will enter probate immediately, and all bequests will be distributed according to Pennsylvania law. If anyone wishes to contest these provisions, you have 90 days to file with the probate court. The silence was absolute. 14 people processed revelations that destroyed years of assumptions about family hierarchy, devotion, and recognition. Victoria was the first to find her voice, and when she did, it came out as a shriek. This is insane. I lived with her for 5 years. I gave up everything to take care of her. She can't just give everything to Claire because she made a few phone calls and sent some books. She absolutely can, Margaret replied calmly, and she did. Mrs. Donovan was of sound mind when she executed this will, and she updated it 6 months ago to ensure these provisions reflected her final wishes. The will is legally sound and will stand up to any challenge. But I'm the one who was there every day. I'm the one who sacrificed my life. You're the one who lived rent-free for 5 years while saving your entire income. Margaret interrupted, her tone sharpening. Mrs. Donovan's financial records show she paid for your food, utilities, insurance, and gave you approximately $800 monthly in spending money. By her calculation, you received over $150,000 in benefits during those 5 years, which she considered more than adequate compensation for your presence. The math was devastating in public. Victoria hadn't been sacrificing. She'd been profiting while building a reputation for devotion that had now been exposed as performance. Mom spoke next, her voice shaking. Claire, did you know about this? No, I said honestly, speaking for the first time since the reading began. Grandma asked me to trust her and not react until Margaret finished reading. This is the first I'm hearing about any of this. But she must have discussed her estate plans with you. She didn't. We talked about books, politics, history, her memories of raising you and your sisters. We talked about her, not about what I might inherit someday. The distinction landed visibly. They'd all been so focused on inheritance expectations that none of them had considered building relationships that valued Grandma as a person, rather than as a potential benefactor. Aunt Patricia tried a different approach. Claire, surely you can see that Victoria deserves more than $5,000 after living with Mom for 5 years. Even if the legal documents say otherwise, morally, I interrupted quietly, Victoria received $150,000 in free rent and support. Morally, she slept with headphones while Grandma lay on the bathroom floor for 6 hours. Morally, she performed devotion for an audience while providing minimal actual care. Grandma saw the difference between presence and connection, and she made her decisions accordingly. The room remained silent. No one could argue with Grandma's written words, or her clear-eyed assessment of what she'd observed over 5 years of daily proximity. Victoria stood abruptly, knocking her chair backward. This isn't over. I'll contest the will. I'll prove she was manipulated or mentally incompetent or, good luck with that, Margaret said, pulling another document from her file. Mrs. Donovan anticipated potential challenges. 6 months ago, she underwent a comprehensive cognitive evaluation specifically to document her mental competence. I have a notarized letter from her neurologist confirming she had full decision-making capacity when she updated her will. I also have recordings of our meetings where she discussed her reasoning in detail, demonstrating clear logic and articulate thinking. Victoria's face went pale. Grandma had anticipated every challenge and built an unassailable legal foundation for her decisions. If you're still watching, type deserve in the comments if you believe real relationships matter more than performative devotion. The aftermath of the will reading transformed our family dynamics permanently. Victoria moved out of Grandma's house, now my house, within 2 weeks, her 5 years of rent-free living ending with minimal gratitude and maximum resentment. She'd expected the house, the money, the recognition. Instead, she'd received public exposure of her performative devotion and $5,000 she considered insulting. The family struggled to reconcile Grandma's written assessment with years of celebrating Victoria's constant presence. Mom tried multiple times to convince me that family harmony required redistributing some of the inheritance more equitably, but I held firm to Grandma's clearly stated wishes. She didn't want equity, I'd told Mom during one particularly difficult conversation. She wanted recognition of genuine connection versus performative presence. Victoria got exactly what Grandma thought she deserved based on 5 years of observation. The probate process took 4 months, during which Victoria did attempt to challenge the will on grounds of undue influence and mental incompetence. The challenge was dismissed within 3 weeks based on a cognitive evaluation, the recorded meetings with Margaret, and testimony from Grandma's doctors about her clear thinking until her final days. When the estate finally settled, I inherited exactly what Grandma had intended: the house, the investments, the savings, and the validation that our relationship had been as meaningful to her as it was to me. I sold the Philadelphia house for $695,000 and used the proceeds to establish the Margaret Rose Donovan Foundation for Elder Care, focusing on programs that trained family caregivers in genuine emotional support rather than just physical presence. The investment portfolio and savings provided financial security, while I continued my career in Seattle, now with resources to pursue passion projects and community involvement that Grandma would have appreciated. But the most valuable inheritance wasn't financial. It was the validation that quality of connection matters more than quantity of contact, that real devotion doesn't require performance or audience, and that people who genuinely observe can distinguish between authentic care and strategic presence. 6 months after the will reading, Victoria sent a text message. I hope you're happy with your inheritance. You took everything Grandma promised me. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I thought about Grandma's words. Real love doesn't require an audience. Finally, I typed, Grandma didn't promise you anything except a place to live while you figured out your life. She gave me what she thought I'd earned through genuine relationships. The difference between those two things is exactly what he will address. Victoria never responded, and we haven't spoken since. Drop genuine in the comments if you understand that authentic relationships always outlast performative ones. This is the lesson that changed everything. The real lesson from Grandma's will wasn't about money, or houses or investment portfolios. It was about the difference between performing devotion for recognition and building genuine connections that value people for who they are, rather than what they can provide. 1. Victoria had spent 5 years performing the role of devoted granddaughter, carefully constructing an image that would secure inheritance and family approval. But Grandma had been watching, observing, noting the gaps between public performance and private reality. Meanwhile, I'd built a relationship based on genuine interest in Grandma's thoughts, experiences, and perspective. I'd called not because I expected a reward, but because I valued our conversations. I'd sent books and researched treatments not to secure inheritance, but because I wanted to improve her quality of life. Grandma had seen the difference, and she'd made sure her estate distribution reflected the truth about what she'd valued most. Authentic connection over performative presence, quality of attention over quantity of contact, genuine care over strategic devotion. The inheritance changed my financial situation significantly, but the validation of knowing that Grandma truly understood our relationship was priceless. She'd seen through Victoria's performance, recognized my genuine connection, and used her final act to tell the truth about what real devotion looks like. Sometimes the people who perform loudest are hiding the thinnest substance. Sometimes quiet consistency matters more than dramatic demonstrations. And sometimes, the grandmother everyone underestimated as too old to notice what was really happening, was actually the most perceptive person in the room. Tell me about a time when someone surprised everyone by seeing past performances to recognize genuine connection. How did their perception change your understanding of relationship value, and what would you say to someone struggling with family members who confuse presence with devotion?